Okay. Well, welcome everybody to our Transition Tuesdays at CPAC. Today we have a special treat. We have Alycia Trakas from the State Department of Education, the Bureau of Special Education. She's responsible for providing technical assistance, information, and compliance with the state and federal laws regarding special education to school districts across Connecticut. Alycia manages the Individuals with Disabilities Act, Part B, Indicator 13, which is secondary transition, and Indicator 14, post-school outcomes. Additionally, she's responsible for the educational initiatives around the areas of specific learning disabilities, including dyslexia and secondary transition. Alycia has over 17 years of experience in education. Okay. And we also have with us Missy Wrigley. She's a consultant with the State Education Resource Center, otherwise known as SERC. Her number one objective is to ensure that all students with disabilities attain the skills needed to successfully achieve their post-school goals. Missy collaborates closely with her colleagues at the State Department of Education, as well as other stakeholders across the state, to support the development of effective secondary transition planning services. Missy has served as co-facilitator of the State Transition Task Force and as the core team member of the Connecticut Transition Community of Practice. Missy is an endorsed PBIS trainer, step trainer, and MAPS trainer. So welcome, thank you. And I will turn it over to you. I just want to also let everyone know that we are recording, so everything should be kept confidential. If you have to ask questions about your child or have specific information, you can also set up a meeting with us afterwards. And welcome.
Thank you, Laura. And we're happy to be here. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alycia Trakas. What a wonderful, warm introduction, Laura. And it's my pleasure to be here with my colleague, Missy Wrigley, who we work very closely with, and all things transition. So I'm just thrilled and appreciate the opportunity. So thank you to Laura, Beth Reel, and Jane Hampton-Smith for inviting us to be here this evening with you on the CPAC Transition Tuesday. What a wonderful way to spend an evening, especially now that the weather, it's a little bit darker sooner. So, hopefully you're all comfy, cozy at home, and we hope to provide you with a little bit of an overview of some secondary transition resources and updates. So as Laura mentioned, I work in the Bureau of Special Education at the Connecticut State Department of Education. I know that my colleague and supervisor, Brian Klimkowitz, it's a thrill and a pleasure to be under his leadership for sure. And we really appreciate all that he does. I know he works very closely with CPAC and has been participating in many sessions previously, but I always like to sort of remind everybody of the mission of the Bureau of Special Education. So it's twofold: to obviously, one, engage in collaborative efforts to ensure that students with disabilities receive a free, appropriate public education, which we refer to as FAPE, in the least restrictive environment, which we refer to as the LRE, to prepare them for college or training, employment, independent living, and community participation. And that is also one of the purposes of the IDEA. And in the Bureau of Special Education, we also provide leadership guidance, support, and resources to assist educators in meeting federal and state special education laws and requirements in an effort to improve educational outcomes for students with exceptionalities. So I'm honored to be here this evening.
Thank you. And just really quickly, because I forgot to mention it, so I apologize. This is there is a transcript in Spanish, and the instructions were put into the chat, and the link is right under the instructions. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
You're welcome.
So this evening, it seems like a lot for us to go over with you, but Missy and I will be reviewing the secondary transition requirements, a few changes that happened to regulations and requirements. We're going to give you a brief overview of the highlights of the new IEP Form and the CT SEDS, which is the Connecticut Special Education Data System. Missy will go through the transition planning and the new IEP. We'll go through some secondary transition resources, some youth leadership opportunities, and some professional learning opportunities. So the very first thing we'll review is just two of changes in some regulations regarding secondary transition. On this slide, you'll find hyperlinks, and I believe, Laura, I did send you a PDF of the slides. I don't know if that's shared or something that you'll share with participants. So these are all hyperlinked, so you'll be able to access them just by clicking on the link from the slides. So this again is some state and federal regulations regarding secondary transition that we'll review throughout the presentation this evening. The first two that we're going to talk about are changes to one of our Connecticut general statutes due to Public Act 21-144. So effective July 1st of this year, 2021, beginning not later than the first Individualized Education Program, or IEP, to be in effect when a student turns 14 years old or younger, if determined appropriate by the planning and placement team, which we refer to as a PPT, and updated annually. The IEP has to include appropriate, measurable, post-secondary goals based upon age-appropriate transition assessments related to training or education and employment, and where appropriate, independent living skills, as well as the transition services, including courses of study that are needed to assist the student in reaching those goals. So previous to this, it was aligned with the IDEA, which was beginning in the IEP for students at age 16. 2 years ago, in 2019, it changed to be age 14 for students with autism spectrum disorder, but age 16 for all other disability categories. And again, this July, it is effective for all students age 14.
That's very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite things to happen.
And then the second update in our regulations and requirements was due to a recent court order, AR versus the Connecticut State Board of Education. And as a result of that court order, all students in Connecticut remain eligible for special education and related services under the IDEA through the age of 21, or up until their 22nd birthday when they reach the maximum age of eligibility, or until they graduate from high school with a regular high school diploma, whichever occurs first. So that was sort of changes to the two ends of our transition, when transition begins and when transition ends in Connecticut. So students have transition planning in their IEP beginning when they're age 14, and they're eligible through the age of 21 or until they graduate with a regular high school diploma, whichever occurs first.
And it can always start earlier.
Or
you don't
earlier.
have to wait till 14. It can always start earlier. And so that's a PPT decision. And so we can actually do that, which I think is a good idea too.
So I didn't know if there was any questions about those two
Yeah.
things before we move on.
There is a question in the chat. Let me make sure I get to there is a question. Can individuals go back to districts to ask for those services that were not provided because they were required to graduate at 21? And you have a specific example.
So if a student has graduated with a regular high school diploma, then their eligibility under the IDEA has ended. However, there are dispute resolution options available. Graduation is considered a change in placement, and so prior written notice is required. There are dispute resolution options available to parents if they disagree with that change in placement.
All set?
As of right now, no other questions. Any questions on Facebook, Vanessa?
No, not for now.
I just want to say thank you for monitoring all of that because you've got a lot going on, so we appreciate it in the background. Thank you. So the next part, we'll just review a few highlights of the new IEP form in Connecticut, as well as the Connecticut Special Education Data System. So the new IEP form, we're really excited about this, has been redesigned to be easier to understand and more user-friendly. One of the goals is that it aligns with and supports the PPT's decision-making process. It is designed to be adaptive, so it allows for full individualization of the IEP. And it's a stronger connection between a student's present level of performance and their annual goals and short-term objectives. So in this slide, on this slide, there is a link to the new IEP form, which was recently revised in August of 2021, where we are in the midst of going through a pilot right now. So there could be some minor changes, but the new IEP form is available for review online. And so Missy is going to, in a few slides, go into the transition sections of the new IEP to review them with you. And the CT SEDS system, as I said, is the Connecticut Special Education Data System. And a few highlights of that system are that it was built to be an adaptive electronic IEP document that was designed to improve the format and flow of information with easy to use displays. It does include a parent portal for families to access their students' IEP and other information, as well as language translation to ensure that parents receive documents in their native language. It's also built to assist PPTs in navigating the special education process, leading to the development of high-quality IEPs for Connecticut students. Certainly more information will be coming. The plan is to implement the new IEP and the CT SED system in the fall of next year, 2022 to 2023 school year.
I do have a question that came in, and they want to know if the GED is a regular high school diploma.
A student who's exited to go to a GED program is not graduated with a regular high school diploma, although they may receive a general education diploma equivalency if they meet the requirements of the GED. And I will mention, thank you, Laura, a student who's exited because they receive a certificate of completion or attendance has not graduated with a regular high school diploma. So if a student is exited with a certificate of completion and has not graduated with a regular high school diploma, they are eligible to re-enroll, again, up until they're through the age of 21 or until they graduate from high school with a regular high school diploma. So a certificate of completion is not a terminating factor in regards to their IDEA eligibility. So students' eligibility ends when they either graduate with a regular high school diploma, reach the maximum age of eligibility, which is again through the age of 21, or if it's determined that they're no longer a student with a disability. Good question. So now Missy's going to go through, I'm sure what everybody is excited to go through is the transition planning portions of the new IEP.
All right. Well, I have to say that I'm excited that we have a new IEP, and I really wasn't sure that we would have one before I retired. So I'm ecstatic that we actually have one. And as a parent of a student with an IEP, it is going to be much more accessible and understandable, I think, for parents as well as students, because we want our students to be very well aware of what's on the IEP also. And so it's an important piece. I think it'll be great. This is one of the new graphics that was created with the development of the new IEP, and it really just outlines the IEP components. But I love the way it's set up because it really stresses the fact that we need an alignment between all of those pieces and what that looks like. All right, so we start off with our present levels, and we have to have measurable annual goals that support those. What kind of supplementary aids and services are going to be there to support the student to achieve those goals? And then secondary transition. Now, I personally believe the secondary transition begins at the top of that. However, when we get into secondary transition, it really does influence all of the other parts that are there. And so it influences what we write for annual goals. It influences what assessments we're going to be giving. And so and we have to take a look at, well, what are the supplementary aids and services that we're going to provide a student when they're out in the world of work, or if they go on to college. So we have to think about those things too. And then what special education and related services are there for students to support them. And then we go into the IEP implementation and progress monitoring. Notice that with progress monitoring, we have a lot of questions we have to ask, and we have to go right back up here and to adjust if we need to. And so it's really, I think that families will be happy to see that there is a lot more progress monitoring identified on that IEP so that you have a better understanding of the goals and how they're being met and how students are making progress. Okay. This is a graphic that we've had around for a while. It was updated in 2020. And it's really, I just call it our flow chart, our transition flow chart. So it really just tells you all of the steps that we take in secondary transition. As you note, we start here with age-appropriate transition assessments and what that looks like for the student. And as we go through, and we're having some conversation today, then we'll go through each of these parts here. All right. Feel free to stop me. Laura, you're doing a great job with chat, but if I get to talking and you don't understand anything, please go ahead and stop me with that. So when we talk about age-appropriate transition assessments, now I could talk to you about transition assessments for hours and hours. It really helps to formulate what we should be seeing on our IEP. And so when we're talking about transition assessments, it's an ongoing process. It's not just one assessment that's done once a year. And so we should be seeing a variety of different assessments done throughout the year so that it helps to inform whatever goals and objectives are written for your son or daughter or student. It is designed to help the student determine what their strengths are. So assessments are really there to help the student understand more about themselves and what makes them tick. What are their strengths? What are their challenges? What interests do they have? Do they want to be working outside or do they want to be working inside? Do they want to go on to college? What will that look like for them? So it's helping them to answer all of those questions. And then it helps us, well, when we talk about our post-secondary outcome goals, it's the student's goal. So it helps a student be able to decide what their post-secondary outcome should be. And hopefully it helps them take that ownership in the transition planning process. It's very difficult to have a really effective transition process unless the student is involved as well as their families. So everybody needs to be on the same page to see what that looks like. Now, it's just as important for us to understand what a transition assessment is not. It's not the same for each student. So I have twins. Now I have one that's on an IEP, but if I had had both that were on an IEP, I wouldn't expect to see the same assessments on each student's IEP because each student is a very individual student. And so they're going to need different assessments. And I've already mentioned, it's not something that's conducted just once. It's not something, that somebody would say, oh, we have a PPT. Next week, I have to make sure I get my transition assessment done. That's just not the way it works, all right? And it's also not something that's just done by a special educator. So it is, you know, special educators, yes. Transition coordinators, yes, they all complete assessments, but general education teachers complete assessments. So if we have a student who is going into culinary arts, let's say a former student of mine, Tommy, wanted to get into the restaurant business. So he was taking lots of food courses. Well, those food courses, because they support what his post-secondary option was, are transition assessments. Any activity that they do in there, and she used to have some great end of the year or midterm assessments, and Mrs. Wrigley benefited a lot from all the food that Tommy would make and I got to taste. So it's really helping the student understand what an assessment is, okay? Okay, now when we look at our new IEP, this is what it would look like when we're doing the transition assessments. So, you know, is a PPT developing post-secondary transition goals and services for the student? If they're not, then you're not going to see any of this on the IEP. So that's kind of a cool part too. If they are, then we have to list what the transition assessments are. And this is an exciting part. We have to make sure that we identify the results of those assessments, and you'll be able to see a separate area specific to the results of the assessments. And then there's also a section to keep the history of the transition assessments that have been done prior. And so these assessments here are the assessments that were completed during the time of that IEP. And then we can have a history of transition assessments that are maintained below that, if we need to have some other, you know, just to check and see what else the student has been involved with. All right. So I'm very excited about this portion of the new IEP. When we talk about, it looks like we skipped one. Hold on. Let's go. Oh, it doesn't want to do that slide. Oh, there it is. All right. So when we talk about transition assessments, we have this wonderful different options throughout the state, person-centered planning. And person-centered planning is just a set of approaches. If you've been part of a MAPS or a PATH process, then you know what I'm talking about. Oftentimes, the things that we pull out of a person-centered planning option actually help us inform what else goes on the IEP, whether it's assessments that need to be completed, additional assessments that need to be completed, goals that the student needs to set up, the interests that they have, the barriers that we need to address to help them get to the goals that they want to have. So if you're ever at a crossroads, with your student, then I would suggest you do a person-centered planning option to help you through that process. What we've done is we've just identified some of those that we cover in Connecticut. We have maps, which are great because they're colorful. You get this huge map of where the student is going and what that looks like. PATH is also that same type of process, except it kind of approaches it differently and it goes backwards. We do have trainings on both of those. Charting the life course is throughout Connecticut. DDS brought it in a few years back, and through the support of the State Department and all of our local RESCs, we are making sure that everybody is informed about charting the life course. We have trained, I'm one of them, ambassadors throughout the state that can come and talk with families and work them through the life course framework. And it's just a great, and so the life course framework goes from birth to aging. And so it's not something that starts at just age 14. And so it definitely is something that families can work with their student starting at a young age. I was at a parent night session last night in Ellington, and there were several family members who came up to talk to me, and their children were 3 years old and 5 years old and 8 years old. And I pulled out a book on life course and showed them some of the things that they can be doing. And so they were quite excited about that. So it's definitely a good resource. And then we have Renew. So Renew is a person-centered planning option out of New Hampshire. It is Connecticut. We did some training in it a few years back. I'm really hoping to bring that back in to our training next year, but it requires a good solid team from the district to participate, and it's specifically designed for students with social emotional issues or behavior issues. It works a little bit different than a MAPS or a PATH because it begins the process with just a student and a facilitator. And so then they bring in the rest of the group to help the student be able to achieve the goals that they've established. But all of these, you know, it's not a one size fits all. So it's really depending on the student as far as which type of tool you would use to work through the process.
Missy, I do have a question. There's some, what types of specific assessments are you talking about? This person has a child with multiple disabilities, so I'm assuming they're not quite understanding what is meant by person-centered planning. So if you can just explain the difference between transition assessments that the school district would do and person-centered planning.
The assessments that would be completed could be a variety of anything. So we have standardized assessments, which you most commonly see on a student's IEP. So you have your WISC and you have your what is the
Woodcock-Johnson?
Woodcock-Johnson, thank you. Just lost it. We have the Woodcock-Johnson, all of those pieces you would commonly see on a student's IEP. You have some assessments that are done, grade level assessments that you would see that are universal assessments that the whole school body takes. You would commonly see those on the IEP. When we're talking about transition assessments, we're talking about things that, as I told you, that if there's an assessment done in a class that's supporting them to go on to a post-secondary option or an interest inventory, what is it that they like to do? If it's a student who has multiple disabilities and we need to make sure that we are providing them with the technology that they need to access whatever it is that they want to do, then that would be an assessment. If we have a student who's out in the world of work and we have to go through and we can do a task analysis of what the job is on site, we can make checklists, we can observe the student doing those things, and that's a situational assessment. That's an assessment that you might see on the IEP when we're talking about transition. So it could be a variety of different things. It really depends on the student. And if you want to know more about the different assessments, I would love to sit, and I have several trainings that we do on assessments. And so I would love to sit and share with you. So my contact information is in the handout, and you're more than welcome to contact me to get more information about that. So, all right, you're welcome. All right, so charting the life course, this is just a little bit more about that. What's important to note, as with the assessments, we have what it is and what it isn't. You know, it's a framework, but it's not just about the tools, and it's got some wonderful tools to help a student and the family go through the whole process of deciding what the student's vision is and what it is that they want to achieve. But it's really about the conversations and the discussions, and it's really about setting some very high expectations for our students and what that looks like, and then identifying what are the supports that they actually need. So it's a wonderful framework. Many of the districts in Connecticut have people who have been trained in life course, as you know, as well as I told you, our ambassadors that can come out and do some facilitation. Okay. Laura, are you an ambassador? Have you been trained in?
Not yet, but I will be trained soon.
All right, so I know Beth is, but yeah, I wasn't sure if you were.
Yes.
But you're on the list. Okay.
I am on the list. Yes, very soon.
Good for you.
I'm just going to interject really quickly because we had another question a little bit ago about the GED in the high school. returning to transition. So can a student re-enroll in high school for transition services only if they have a GED? And I know there's some question of whether they actually received a state certificate, diploma, or fit that category, or just have a GED. So if Alycia, if you want to answer that question, that would be helpful.
Sure. So again, a GED, students have to withdraw from school in order to take the GED. I can certainly put a link to the Connecticut's GED webpage in the chat if that would be helpful. And there are some contacts there who would be able to answer GED specific questions in regards to their eligibility. Again, students who have a GED are not students who have graduated. It's completely different than a regular high school diploma. So a student's IDEA eligibility is terminated if they graduate with a regular high school diploma, or if they reach the maximum age of eligibility, which in Connecticut is now through the age of 21. So a certificate of completion or attendance or a GED is not the same as a regular high school diploma. So technically, yes, a student who has a GED could certainly re-enroll, again, either up until they graduate with a regular high school diploma or until they reach the maximum age of eligibility for services, which is through the age of 21, whichever occurs first.
And I just want to add, because we've received several calls because people are asking what happens when the day they turn 22. And once that student turns 22 on their 22nd birthday, they are no longer part of the school district. Services terminate. So just want to make
Right, so
sure.
their services would be terminated the last day that they're 21 years old. So the day they turn 22, the 22nd birthday, many of the state services would kick in for students. So like DDS services, for example, I know Brian was on here a few weeks ago. So DDS begins providing services to students who are eligible on the day they turn 22. If that makes sense. Okay.
So
Thank
there's a question I see in chat on how to become an ambassador. You have to go through a lot of training. It is, we collaborate with, it's Missouri, right?
University of
Is Missouri?
Kansas City, Missouri. Yep.
Yes.
UMKC.
And so we collaborate with them. We get all of our materials from them. I know that we are having another round of people being trained as ambassadors. I don't know, and you can email Alycia directly to find out. I don't know if that has filled yet. I'm not sure how many people we can have for that, but you can also go on to lifecourse.com.
I think it's
I can
Life
look
Course Tool. Yeah, it's I think it's the same link. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
And there is a section in there about how to become an ambassador, and you can go through and do it that way too. So I would check with Alycia first and send her an email if you're really interested. And then if that has, if we're full or
I will say
whatever,
our session is full, but
Okay.
somebody could certainly reach out to UMKC because they do host ambassador series throughout the year.
Yes. Okay. Did you want to continue, or did you want to do this, or did you want me to continue?
Oh, sorry, I was putting that information in the chat. Sure. So you're welcome. One of the other requirements in regards to transition is PPT membership. So for PPT meetings where a purpose of the meeting is consideration of post-secondary goals for the student or the transition services needed to assist the student in reaching the goals, the district must invite the student to the PPT meeting. If the student does not attend the PPT meeting, the district must take other steps to ensure that the student's preferences and interests are considered at the meeting. And in a few slides, Missy's going to go through what where that's documented and what it looks like in the new IEP. Additionally, to the extent appropriate, and obviously with the written consent of the parent or the adult student who has reached the maximum age of eligibility, the district has to invite a representative of an outside participating agency that's likely to either pay for or provide transition services. And Missy is in a few slides going to go through the role of our outside participating agencies and where that's documented again on the new IEP.
So I will just add, as I've already mentioned, my son has an IEP. He is 10, and he has been to 4 or 5 of his PPT meetings already. I am a firm believer that students need to be involved in this process and understand what's happening. So again, he does not go to the full meeting, but when we talk about the annual part of what he's doing in class, how successful he is or whatever, then he is there. We do not have it, you know, we have to work the meeting around his recess because we don't want him to miss that, and around lunch because those are the 2 most important pieces for him in school. So we do not want him to miss those, but he always brings a snack. When we used to meet in person, he would bring a snack and share it with everybody else, but now we're always virtual. So, but it's very important for families to understand that their student needs to be at that meeting. And they need to start young, because if we wait till they're in high school, they really don't want to start coming then. So it's real important to get them involved as soon as possible. Okay. And when we're talking about being involved with the whole PPT process and the IEP, we're really looking at the students building their self-advocacy skills and building the self-determination that they need to be successful. When we were talking about assessments earlier, one of the most important areas that a student needs to have an understanding and understand what their strengths and challenges are is in the area of self-determination. And so that would be an important assessment to see on a student's IEP. Whatever level they are, it's an important assessment to be there. We have a couple of things that we utilize. Stepping Forward, you can find that on CPAC's website. You can find it on the State Department's website too. It's a resource for students on self-advocacy and self-determination. And chapter 4 in there is all about participating in their PPT meetings. And so it's a great resource. The other thing that we have for educators, as we have a module on, it's a course that students can take on a student-directed, self-paced, getting them involved with their PPT process and understanding their IEP. So if educators, so if you have a student that you feel would really do well with this course or should have this course, go in and talk to your educators, or if we have educators on call here, you can contact me and we can look at setting you up with your students being involved with the course. Okay. Oh, so I think Alycia said we were going to talk about this, and I thought she was going to talk about this. So when we talk about on our IEP, there's a section in there, and we have to invite outside agencies and understand how they're going to help and participate in the process of creating the goals and understanding the students' strengths and developing their strengths and understanding what their challenges are. And so we want to take a look at what participating agencies we would want involved in that process. So the agencies are going to provide that information about the services and eligibility criteria. So we have to remember that once they leave our umbrella of IDEA, then it's eligibility. You know, are they eligible to receive certain services? And so we have to make sure that families understand that, students understand that. So it's important that we have a lot of those conversations. Assist with the identification of adult and community agencies and services. That's part of our PPT process, part of bringing in those individuals so that we can help the student identify what their needs are and help families identify what their needs are. And so providing services for students during school. So we have a great, and I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with ADS, which is the Bureau of Aging and Disability Services. I almost called it BRS again. So BRS is part of that. And part of that is a level up services. And so I used to work very closely with the program and going into districts and working with students when they are writing resumes and going out and doing some job shadowing and just learning about self-advocating for themselves and what that looks like, preparing to go out into the world of work and what does that mean for them. So if your district, all districts have a level up counselor that's assigned to them. And so you might want to check it out and see if your student is involved with level up services. And they're great. It's a great opportunity for an additional person to come into district and to work with the students to help them understand what some of their strengths and challenges are. Okay. Oh, here it goes again. Oh, there you go. See, in a nutshell, I just explained level up for you. It is again for students. So transition services begin at age 14 now in Connecticut, but level up services do not begin until age 16. So it is for students age 16 through 21. And so you can have an IEP and or a 504 plan. And so what that looks like for the student. Okay. Here is where we document in the PPT or on the IEP, the PPT membership. So we have to make sure I can get all of those things out correctly. So is the student in attendance at the meeting? So you would answer yes or no. Hopefully the answer is yes, all right. Summary of the student's preferences and interests, because it's very important that we identify those. If the student is not in attendance, it is still the district's responsibility to make sure that their preferences and interests are identified and listed on the IEP. Were any outside agencies invited to attend the PPT meeting? So what's also important that the district cannot invite any outside agencies to that meeting without written permission from the families. And so that's just an important piece. They can ask you, and you know, and you can ask them to invite certain people and stuff. So it just, everybody needs to work together, but they cannot do that without written consent from a family member. Okay. And then identifying whether or not a participating agency has agreed to provide any services for the student. And if that's there, then we have to give a description of that. Alycia, anything else you want to add to that?
No, so given like the example that you just used about BRS level up services, if BRS has agreed to provide pre-employment transition services for the student, that would be where it's documented in the IEP.
And we do have a question. If it looks
Thank
like
you for stepping forward in there.
Oh, you're welcome. For level up services, will the new law be require them to extend the services to up to age 20 till their 22nd birthday? I didn't say that correctly, but through their 21st.
So level up services are available for students age 16 through the age of 21.
Yes,
Right.
thank you for saying it better than I was trying to ask the question.
If you
All
think
set.
about it, just a few days ago, it was 8:49 p.m. So no worries.
What's that? Well, I don't know. I think my mouse needs a new battery or something. All right, so we're back at our flow chart again. So we've had conversation about assessments, taking a look at what the students' needs, strengths, and preference are, what their interests are. This is an important piece because when we look at those assessments, then we need to decide whether or not the student needs to decide whether or not it was a good match. And if it's yes, then the student can begin to write their measurable post-secondary outcome goals. If no, then we need to go back and we need to do some more assessments. So that's what we're talking about, that ongoing process. You know, I can give you, and I love to give examples, and so people have to watch my time. But if, you know, I had a young lady, she was a sophomore, her name was Samantha, we always called her Sam. And, you know, she wanted to work in daycare. And that's what she wanted to do. And I says, all right, well, let's go and let's do a job shadow. She went to the career person and they set it up, and she went and she did a job shadow. She came back in the afternoon. So I said, Sam, how'd you make out? And so she was a sophomore. She says, Mrs. Wrigley, there is no way in this lifetime am I ever going to work in a daycare, ever. And she says, and so then she goes on to tell me, you know, her experiences and everything. And so, you know, we have to go to plan B. So then we had to go back and we had to look at other assessments and different things and, you know, what else she wanted to do. And so that was fine. But I will tell you, the happy ending to this story is that Sam is married and she's living in Maine now. She was in Texas for quite a while. And she has a brood of 4 children. So she has her little mini daycare going. She's a work-at-home mom and loving her children and living on a farm and raising animals and children and just having a great time. So, you know, I tell her that I talk about her all the time, and so she's okay with that. All right. So now we're going to start talking about our measurable post-secondary outcomes that the student is creating. And I know we have family members here, but we have to remember that those post-secondary outcome goals are the student's goals. Sometimes we don't think they're very realistic. However, we need to support the student so that they understand what is a realistic goal for them. And sometimes what we think might not be realistic, if they want it, they'll fight to get it. And so those are some of the things that we need to consider. All right. So when in Connecticut, we have a minimum of 2 post-secondary outcome goal statements that must be identified on the IEP. So there must be one in post-secondary education and training, and there must be one identified for employment. If appropriate, then there must also be one identified for independent living skills. I'll be real honest, I don't know who it wouldn't be appropriate for, but that's just a Missy comment, okay? So when we talk about post-secondary outcome goals, they refer to the goals of what the student wants to do when they leave school. So, you know, if I should run into them, you know, a year or so after school, it's what they're doing then, not what they're doing during school. Those are the annual goals. We'll get to those in a few minutes, all right? They're measurable statements of what the student's vision is, what their hopes are, what is it that they want to do, why are they going through all of this education, what is it that they're preparing for, what do they want to do when they leave high school, okay? It could be very general when they start off. I knew a lot of students who didn't have a clue as to what they wanted to do. But as time progressed, and that's another reason for the assessments, to help them understand what they might want to do, the research and all of those different things. So then they can be more specific over time. And they can change every year. It can change. I mean, think of adults. Adults will go through in their lifetime, I think it's a little bit higher. It used to be 5 to 7 different occupations, but I think it's up to 7 to 12 now, different occupations over their lifetime. And so it's really important for us to help a student understand that and always have backup plans. Okay. And this is what it would look like on our IEP. So does the student require specially designed instruction to support independent living skills? If it's no, then there's nothing going to be there. All right. If it's yes, then they're going to ask you to identify an independent living skills post-secondary outcome goal. All right. So they would just be identified there. All right. You can go onto the website. Well, you know, there's lots of examples of those, and we have other trainings where we actually go into all of that. But so just to give you that. And this is where we talk about the alignment I was talking to you about when we're, why I was so excited about the new IEP. From the post-school, post-secondary outcome goals, then we write measurable annual goals that support those. And that's the stuff that they work on during the year. Those are the goals that you're going to see that they're working on with the objectives throughout the year. That's where you're going to see the progress monitoring data to see whether or not the student is being successful with those goals. All right. Oh, stop. I talk to my computer all the time. Okay. This is still, did it skip ahead?
Nope, that's the next one.
That's one, okay. I skipped ahead on my paper, so I flipped them too fast. All right. So when we talk about the what it looks like on the IEP, this is where we talk about transition present levels. And you will see, so we have we don't have pages anymore in the IEP, we have sections. And so we have our academic section, we have our functional section, functional skills section, and we have our transition section. And so for each of those sections, families and students need to give their input. You need to identify what families think about it, what's going on, the things that, you know, are going well, what concerns they might have. Students get to put in their input also. All right. And so then we identify the present levels of performance in transition. What are their strengths? So all of those assessments, we identify what were the strengths that came out of those assessments. What are the things that, you know, the student is really good at? What are the concerns or challenges that the student may have related to that particular area? And then how is it going to impact the student's disability and involvement and progress in reaching the goals that they want to reach and being successful in school? Okay. So we have annual transition goals and short-term objectives. So when we're talking about secondary transition, for every post-secondary outcome goal that's written, we must have an annual goal, at least one. We can have more, but we must have one corresponding annual transition goal that supports it for each one, and short-term objectives that support that annual goal. Okay. So the annual transition goals are written as measurable statements. You know, it has to be measurable. And you may be familiar with SMART goals. You know, it has to be measurable, realistic, timely, all of those good things. And so it has to be measurable. It has to be able to look at some progress monitoring tools to see if indeed the student is being successful. And it has to be something that the student can accomplish within the academic year of that IEP. Okay. And then we have short-term objectives that actually support that annual goal and what that looks like. And, you know, there should be 2 or 3 or 4 objectives that are going to support that. We don't want 20 objectives. We need to get through it in one academic year and what that looks like. So we need to have that alignment of everything within the IEP. Okay. So annual transition goals are developed. They're written in measurable statements I talked to you about already, directly related to the concerns and needs. So on that present levels page for secondary transition, if there was a concern and need written, and this is the same for academics. If there's a concern and need written, there must be an annual goal that addresses it. And so what is that going to look like for each student? And so then we need to have that alignment and what that looks like. Now, the nice thing about the transition goals is that we can have other annual goals that actually support it. And so there's a little space in our in the IEP that identifies what other goal actually supports this. So if they want to go on to college and we're looking at a post-secondary education and training annual goal, then there's probably an academic goal that the student is also doing that's going to support them also in achieving this. Okay. Short-term objectives outline the progression that the student is going to make in order to achieve that annual goal. And so it really helps them to target that development and taking a look at how, what things is the student doing in order to be successful in that goal. And we really need to outline them right within the IEP. The one thing that we want to make sure, we have this slide when we're talking to educators about goals, is we want active student participation. And so we have this, what we call a dead man test. So if it's something that a dead person could do, then it's not an active goal. If the student needs to sit quietly in the room and pay attention to the teacher, well, I think most people, dead people, probably are very quiet. All right, so we want to see the student engaging. We want to see the student participating. How are they going to be doing that? And so we want to make sure that the student is participating throughout the year. And then, of course, they have to be measurable so that we can monitor student progress. And that'll be a little bit differently written in the IEP this year with the new IEP. Okay. So this is what it looks like. Here's that statement that I told you about the post-secondary education and training annual goal is supported by the following annual goal, and you would just list the goal number would be there. So here's the annual goal. Here are the short-term objectives. Here's the progress monitoring evaluation schedule that's going to go there. Now, in the new IEP, which is something new for everybody, for the academic goals, there is a section here, and they will have to identify Connecticut core standards that this, the academic goals are supporting. And so that is part of the academic section. Now, when we talk about standards for transition, and Alycia, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it is my understanding that we are not required to identify standards. There aren't going to be any drop-down boxes that will have transition standards there.
Well, there's college and career readiness standards that are, so there's CCRR standards that are listed, but the core transition skills, which are the identified 16 areas of transition, certainly can be included in a student's IEP that are aligned to those transition annual goals.
Right. And there's also employment standards that can be utilized for students, and they can go on to onet.com. I forget what it is, but they can go on to ONET. You can just Google ONET and you can check out employment and the skills and things that need to happen for specific occupations. But those are, we have our Connecticut core standards, those 16 skills, and we've worked very hard to identify what are, this is through our transition task force. And so we have over several years, way back when, looked at national standards that are out there and just really honed it into what are the top standards that we really felt that all students in Connecticut should have an understanding of, and so that they can move forward to the best extent possible, because we know that all students are different. And so they're coming at things from different levels and different interest areas. And so all of that is important to take a look at. Okay. And then as we wrap up the flow chart, within those transition goals and short-term objectives that we're writing, all of that during that time, during the whole IEP year, we need to explore possibilities. And so that's why, you know, transition planning is ongoing. It's never stopping. Even for myself, transitioning never stops. And so it's really important to take a look at those things. So we have identified some major areas that we can look at to explore possibilities. So all students should have, in Connecticut, have a student success plan. They have that starting at grade 6. And so that's why I think transition planning should start at grade 6. But that's just my thought again. All right. And so in most cases, people don't understand student success plan, but most districts in Connecticut are utilizing Naviance. And so you may understand that, or you may have heard of Naviance. And so, excuse me, that is where students are researching, you know, different things that they want to do. And so that speaks to transition planning. And so whatever the student is creating within their student success plan and the things that they're looking at, it really should align to what's going on in the IEP. We don't want to have that disconnect. We take a look at instruction and course of study, what's going on with the student, what courses are they taking to help support them to be successful with their post-secondary outcome goal statements. Transition services, what services are available through your district to help them get ready to pass, you know, to be successful with their annual goals, but also to be successful in that post-secondary outcome option that they've. And then what related services does the student need when we're talking about OT, you know, if we're talking about a social worker, if we're talking about, you know, level up services, although that's going to be adult and community agencies, services and agencies. But what services do they need within school? Speech and language, do they need those services in school? So it's really looking at all of the different aspects of what happens with the student. And then the last statement, which you probably can't see because it's very small, it says that this is an ongoing process that may require further assessment, exploration, and experiences resulting in the adjustment of goals written. And so it's just a never-ending process.
So this is just a slide of the definition of transition services from the IDEA. So as we've discussed before, it's really a coordinated set of activities for a student with a disability that's designed to be within a results-oriented process, focused on improving their academic and functional achievement to facilitate their movement from school to post-school activities. And it has to include post-secondary education, vocational education, integrated employment, including supported employment, continuing and adult education, adult services, independent living, or community participation. So we like to refer to that as where the student is going or what's their destination. And transition services are also a coordinated set of activities that are based on the student's needs, strengths, preferences, and interests, and includes instruction, related services, community experiences, the development of employment and other post-school adult living objectives, etc. Those are all those supports and services that will enable the student to get to where they're going. So that's how we kind of like to frame that. And transition services can be either special education, if it's provided as specially designed instruction, or it could be a related service if required to assist the student with a disability to benefit from special education. So we wanted to just include the definition of what are transition services? I know Missy just mentioned it on the slide prior as part of our secondary transition planning process.
I just wanted to point
Oh.
out, oh, I'm sorry. We
No,
just
go
wanted to
ahead.
point out that we did have a question in the chat. What are the resources for finding a job related standard skills? And Missy did put in the chat, ONET. Okay, so I just
And I
wanted
think the
everyone
other
to-
one, about goals and objectives, Missy answered after that question came
correct.
up. Yeah.
Yes,
And
yes.
yes, my email is going to be on, as well as Missy's, will be on the last slide. So you can feel free to email us with any other questions.
Absolutely. Okay, so
Absolutely.
right now we're at 8:10, so I just wanted to
Yep.
remind everybody. Great.
Thanks, Laura.
You're welcome.
So as Missy mentioned, the course of study in the new IEP, there will be an area in the new IEP similar to the current IEP where a course of study is identified, which is a description of the coursework and other activities that are needed to assist the student in achieving their post-secondary outcome goals. And we're gonna move on because I know we have a lot more slides to get through. Also in the new IEP, as is in the current IEP, there is an anticipated exit criteria. So what the student will be exiting from special education upon, whether it's graduation with a regular high school diploma, if it's the student no longer requires specially designed instruction, or if they will reach the maximum age of eligibility. Again, it's an anticipated exit criteria. There are other regulations that I just wanted to make you aware of regarding the transfer of rights at the age of majority. So beginning not later than 1 year before their student reaches the age of majority, which in Connecticut is the age of 18, the IEP has to include a statement that the student has been informed of their rights under the IDEA Part B that will transfer to them, if any, upon reaching the maximum age of eligibility. So in the IEP, it will document that if the student is going to be 17 within a year of the date of the PPT, it's documentation that the student has been informed of their rights, if any, that will transfer them upon reaching the age of majority. On the next slide, we have some exceptions to the transfer of rights, which are part of the Connecticut regulations. So if a student reaches the age of majority, which again is 18 in Connecticut, the school district has to provide notices to the adult student and the parent. All other rights accorded to the parents will be transferred to the student unless a court has determined the student to be incapacitated. And on this slide, there is a link to the Connecticut probate court where you can find additional information about guardianship and conservators. And the district has to notify the adult student and the parent when those rights are transferred. The adult student, upon reaching the maximum, the age of majority in Connecticut, so we refer to that as an adult student, they may give their parents educational decision-making rights, even though they have reached the age of majority, as long as they're notifying the district in writing that they'd like their parent to continue to have the right to make educational decisions on their behalf. And the adult student may revoke those rights at any time. There's also a power of attorney that an adult student, again, that's a student who has already reached the age of majority, can authorize another adult to make educational decisions on their behalf using the power of attorney that complies with our current regulations. And it is required, so yeah, that is correct. So a student reaches the age of majority at age 18. So if they've reached the age of majority, they can determine that a parent would still make educational decisions on their behalf, or they can elect through a power of attorney that another adult makes educational decisions on their behalf. Another requirement within secondary transition is the summary of performance. So for every student, you're welcome. For every student with an IEP whose eligibility under the IDEA terminates due to either graduation with a regular high school diploma or due to exceeding the maximum age of eligibility, which is through the age of 21, the district must provide the student with a summary of performance, which is a summary of the student's academic and functional performance, and includes recommendations on how to assist the student in meeting their post-secondary goals. We do have a link on this slide to the summary of performance document and an SOP frequently asked questions.
Whoa.
That's okay, because we're going to go through this fast. So on this slide, we're going to go through some secondary transition resources. This slide provides a link to the Secondary Transition Planning from School to Adult Life webpage at the Connecticut State Department of Education. Within that webpage, there are multiple tabs that you'll see on the left-hand side that are outlined here on the slide. For example, documents and forms, which are all of the guidance and resources developed from the State Department of Education. Related resources, which are other guidance resources, information that are developed by other state agencies, national partners, etc. There is a
Do you
tab.
want me to, do you want
No,
me to
that's
click on that?
No, that's okay, because I'm afraid we'll run out of time. Resources for students and families that are
'Cause
a compilation of those resources that are specifically identified for families and students. There are IDEA Part B indicator resources related to indicator 13, secondary transition, and 14, post-school outcomes. A link to the laws and regulations that we reviewed on a previous slide of this presentation. A link to the Connecticut transition programs offering transition-only services for students with disabilities ages 18 through 21. And there's steps listed for how to find transition programs in Connecticut. And then there's a link to the interactive guide called Easing into Secondary Transition, which is a comprehensive guide to the resources and services in Connecticut provided by our various agencies and partners. So for example, the Connecticut State Department of Education, CERC, where Missy works, CPAC, where Laura works, all of our, some of our state agencies, and our local RESCs, our Regional Education Service Centers. So those are all live links that you can click on to find contact information and a listing of resources and services that each of our agencies provides. The next series of slides are all of the secondary transition resources that the CSDE has developed. So for example, that transition services flowchart that we've been using throughout the presentation. We also have a secondary transition planning process infograph that's also listed here. They're available in English and Spanish. On the next slide, you'll find some additional resources like Building a Bridge and the Transition Bill of Rights, which are both available in English and Spanish. And on the next slide, you'll find some more transition resources, including the Transition Assessment Resource Manual that Missy mentioned earlier, a link to the Connecticut Transition Skills, which is available in English and Spanish, and the Stepping Forward Guide, which we've mentioned already. And thanks, Laura, for putting that in the chat for us.
And I think it's
Also,
important. I think it's very important, and you're probably going to say this, but all of these are in the process of being.
Yeah, I will say that. Yep. So due to one, not only the changes in our regulations, but also with the new IEP and some changes to the transition sections of the new IEP, these are being revised so that they meet not only the changes in our legislation or other regulations, but as well as the components of the new IEP. So more information to come. This slide goes through the indicator 13 resources, which are a series of checklists and a rubric for scoring transition IEPs to look at the quality of the services and programming for students with disabilities in regards to those transition component sections. On the next slide are the indicator 14 resources. So these are resources related to the post-school outcomes and the post-school outcome survey. So I wanted to mention that 1 year after students exit high school, the Connecticut State Department of Education sends them a survey called the Connecticut Post-School Outcome Survey, which we refer to as the PSOS, to ask them what they've been doing within the last year since they've exited high school, to gather information about their training and education in regards to whether or not they've been enrolled in higher education or in other post-secondary education and training programs, and to find out if they've been employed and what that level of employment is. So if they're, how many hours they're working, are they making minimum wage, et cetera, what type or area of employment they're, engaged in, so that we can look at our post-school outcomes, which are reported back to the federal government. And we also want to know what information was really helpful for them that they learned in high school, and maybe some suggestions of areas that they wish that they had more training on. And we use that in order to change our practices in Connecticut. So as an FYI, a year after students have exited high school, they will be receiving a survey from the Connecticut State Department of Education. And we urge everybody to complete that survey. It is a very short survey. It takes about 10 minutes to send us some information. It is not, we don't identify individuals. It's just information that we gather and summarize. But there are links on this web page, and all of the resources are listed on the slide, to the resources for this survey, as well as previous results of the survey. And I know we're running late on time, so if you have any questions about the survey, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to go through all of the resources with you. On this slide, there are links to the emails, and you'll have the phone numbers for the 6 RESCs in Connecticut, the Regional Education Service Centers, as well as CERC, the Identified Secondary Transition Contact. So for every RESC, there is a contact that can support any technical assistance from families, youth, advocates, and school district staff. So if you are in the CREC region, and if you're not sure, we can certainly get you that information on the RESC Alliance. There's a, type in your zip code and it will tell you which RESC you belong to, where you can email the person identified for your RESC. That's the secondary transition contact with any of your questions. And Missy is our statewide, as our state education resource center. She's also available to answer any of your questions, and her contact information is on that slide as well.
Yeah, you have a better luck at sending me an email than calling me, just so you know. Emails work.
We did want to highlight a few of the youth leadership opportunities that we have available. The first one is the Special Education Youth Advisory Council, which we refer to as the YAC, which is a partnership between the Connecticut State Department of Education and CERC. So there are, students participate in focus groups to share school experiences. They receive leadership trainings, and then they have the option to attend an annual youth leadership summit. On the next slide, you'll find the contact information for Missy's colleague, Nicole, who is the consultant that is responsible for this initiative. So if you have any questions about the Youth Advisory Council, you can certainly email or call Nicole. I don't know if you wanted to say anything else, Missy, about that.
No, it's a great program. And, I've had the opportunity to go in and work with a couple of groups of students. But, they're middle school and high school. And the conference that they have at the end of the year is awesome. And we've had a couple of the youth that participated in that as keynotes at our transition symposium, as well as keynote at the special education back to school sessions. So youth voice is very, very important, and youth developing. So it brings us all the way back to that self-advocacy and self-determination piece that we talked about earlier. So all very important.
The next 2 slides are just an overview of another leadership opportunity that is very close to the Connecticut Parent Advocacy as well. So as part of the Connecticut Community of Practice, the Connecticut Transition Community of Practice, which we refer to as the COP, there was a work group called the Connecticut Secondary Transition Youth Advisory Board, or the YAB. And this group allowed students ages 16 through 25, I think that's the ages, right? Yep. To have their voices heard and participate in some of our leadership activities throughout the state. We utilize YAB members on all of our secondary transition advisory work groups. We feel that we are not planning for students. We need to be planning with students. And so they are active members on all of our committees. And we also ask them for feedback on many of the documents that we revise or create to gather their feedback, because their voices are valued and we want their voices to be heard. So there's contacts for both Michael Scanlon and Allie Kernan, who are at CPAC and also the co-facilitators of the YAB.
And I have to tell you that they're nationally known. This group of individuals, they've been to conferences down in North Carolina with us. They've presented in Delaware. They've presented in Maine. They've presented in lots of different places. That's a wonderful group of individuals, and they're just wonderful to work with. So, and if you can come to our COP meeting, which I think we're going to be sharing that information with you shortly, then you'll be able to meet some of them.
Yeah.
And it's all virtual, so it's not
Yes.
coming
Yeah.
to, it's all virtual. So
Thank you for plugging them, Missy. They are a wonderful group, and they are doing so much in videos and trainings for folks, and very approachable and happy to talk to any parent, any youth. So please reach out.
oh, they're awesome.
They are.
Absolutely awesome.
I'm very excited to hear more about the YAB Gab, and I have
Yes.
been asked, and I have said yes to being interviewed on their podcast, the YAB
Yes.
Gab. So I'm looking forward to that. The
Excellent.
next series of slides is sort of an overview of some of our professional learning opportunities that we wanted to make you aware of. And again, I know we're running short on time, and I promise we will be done tonight at 8:30. Especially since the time has changed and it's still in our bodies probably an hour later than it currently is. But we're really excited to let you know that our 7th annual Secondary Transition Symposium is scheduled to take place over 3 consecutive Tuesdays, starting in January of 2022, January 25th of 2022. I know it's hard to see on the slide. And it will, again, take place over 3 consecutive Tuesdays. And our keynote speaker is Dan Habib, and he will be presenting effective transition practices. And we will have series of breakout sessions and then a film screening of Intelligent Lives with a facilitated Q&A that is also going to be facilitated by Dan Habib. So he'll be kicking off our symposium and closing our symposium on the 3rd Tuesday, which is February 8th. So we're taking our event and breaking it into 3 days over the course of 3 consecutive Tuesdays. Registration is open, and another flyer will be out very soon, but save the dates for sure. And then on the next slide, it's a picture. I know it's hard to see again, but there are CERC and CSDE secondary transition learning opportunities that are open for families that we welcome you to come to. Missy, I didn't know if you wanted to talk about a few of them. I know we're running short on time.
Yeah, and so this just goes through December. So we have a transition for students with autism. So there's a session, Nick Gelbar from UConn and I do that. We'll be doing that next week. We'll also have another one in the spring. We have a how to successfully transition students with mental health issues. We have that in December, and we'll also have another one of those in the spring. And then the person-centered planning introduction to life course that we were talking about earlier, we'll be doing that in December. And we have a handout here that will also show you all of the risks. But all of the options for January to June through CERC will be coming out shortly.
So as Missy said, this is the flyer that has all of the life course sessions through CERC
Right.
and all of the 6 risks. And they're
And it's
open to
important-
anyone, no matter what risk you're from, as long as you can attend the sessions. free to register, all virtual.
And it's important to note also that we do have 2 sessions that are evening sessions for family members and who speak Spanish. And so my colleague Nita will be presenting that, and I'll be there supporting her, but unfortunately, I'm sorry, I don't speak Spanish, but she does well. So we will be looking at supporting that there. Okay.
This is just the next slide is the listing of the Rusk Alliance and the Circ Life Course Education Ambassadors who are providing those trainings that are identified on that flyer. So you can always reach out to them if you have questions.
This is just a flyer. I will go out and do sessions like this in districts or in parent organizations anytime during the year. So it's what we commonly call our Transition 101 session. Laura does them also through CPAC. We're in the process for our transition symposium. Laura and I are working to build this up a little bit and have a Transition 201 session. And so we're going to take it to the next step. But working with families and getting families involved with the secondary transition process is vital. And so anytime we can go out and work with families, we'd like to do that. That's what I mentioned last night. I was doing in Ellington last night. So.
This is a flyer for the Connecticut Transition Community of Practice that I mentioned earlier. Our first meeting is next Thursday from 9 to 11. It is virtual, and the registration link is available on the CT Circ events page. So Laura, I know we'll share these slides and you can click right on the flyer and get right to the CT Circ events page to register. And the next slide is also the Transition Tuesdays that we're offering in partnership with CPAC. We're very thankful for our partners at CPAC, and we're happy to offer some additional evening sessions for our Transition Tuesdays that coincide with the CPAC Transition Tuesdays. So we're looking forward to that new initiative that we have going.
So there was a question about, are we planning any of them in the evening? And I'm not sure what. If you're talking about the life course, then just the Spanish ones are in the evening at this point in time. If you're talking about the transition piece, the family sessions, we'll go out and do those at any time. So yes, we do evening ones. But then the transition community of practice, our Transition Tuesdays, we are working those all around evenings. Oh, is that it?
And then, yes, and I will say that there are some life course sessions that are in the evening that are in English. So I know, for example, ACES has one that's 5 to 7 p.m. Yeah. So certainly look at that flyer. It's hard to see on our little like PowerPoint presentation, but if you do 7:30, yeah. But if you look on that flyer, you'll be able to find some different options of training dates and times. And then the last slide was just our contact information. I know we went through a lot of information very quickly. So once you have a chance to digest it all, if you have questions, again, you can reach out to myself, Missy Wrigley, or any of your RESC secondary transition contacts for further information or to answer your questions. Just thank you again for allowing us to be here, Laura.
Absolutely. Thank you for presenting. So I did put the presentation in the chat and we will email it out. This is recorded, so we will put on our YouTube channel. Usually takes a week or so to get that up. Are there any other additional questions? I'm actually going to launch a poll also just to get some feedback, and I'd be happy if everybody could fill that out. So just a couple of quick questions. But in the meantime, are there any additional questions? Anything on Facebook, Vanessa? Okay.
No questions for Facebook, just a woohoo for Missy. Yes, there's woohoo Missy being awesome as per usual. That was for Claire B.
Excellent. Excellent.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, CPAC will return on December 7th. We'll be talking about the IEP, the current IEP transition assessments post-school outcome goal statements, annual goals, how they all inform transition planning. So we'll go through that in depth a little bit. And that presentation will be repeated on the following Tuesday on December 12th in Spanish. So, and then we will be planning our second half of the year with Transition Tuesdays and having various speakers come. So that flyer will be coming out soon. Okay, great. Thank you, ladies, very much.
Well, thank you for inviting us.
Absolutely. Okay, let me stop Facebook.